Spring arrived in the mountains and brought warmer days and new growth. Daniel worked hard to prepare his fields for planting while Luna stayed close by his side. She had become his constant companion and helper. Daniel noticed things about her that made him certain she was far more intelligent than any earth animal. Luna seemed to understand complex commands. When Daniel said he needed to check the fence on the north side, she would run ahead to that exact location. When he asked her to watch the cattle, she would position herself where she could see the whole herd. She learned new tasks after being shown only once. Daniel had worked with smart dogs before, but Luna was different. Sometimes when she looked at him, he felt like she understood every word he said. One morning, Daniel woke up and found Luna gone. Her pen in the barn was empty and there was no sign of her anywhere on the ranch. He searched for hours, calling her name and checking all her favorite spots. A cold fear settled in his chest. Maybe she had finally decided to return to wherever she came from. Maybe she had just been waiting until she was fully healed. Daniel tried to go about his work, but his heart was not in it. The ranch felt empty again without Luna. He kept looking toward the tree line, hoping to see her silver-blue fur appear. The day passed slowly and evening came. Daniel sat on his porch with a heavy feeling in his chest. He realized how much he had come to depend on her company. Just as the sun was setting, Luna emerged from the forest. But she was not alone. 5 other creatures walked with her, all similar in appearance but with slight differences in size and coloring. They moved together like a coordinated unit, silent and graceful. Daniel stood up slowly, not sure what to expect. Luna approached first and made her soft chirping sound. The others stayed back, watching Daniel carefully. He could see they were cautious but not aggressive. Luna moved between Daniel and the others as if introducing them. Then she did something that amazed him. She looked at Daniel, then at the barn, then back at him. The message was clear. She was asking if the others could stay. Daniel looked at the 5 new creatures. They were all thin and some showed signs of old injuries. They had the same intelligent eyes as Luna, the same sense of awareness that went beyond animal instinct. These were refugees, he realized. They were lost and homeless just like Luna had been. He made his decision quickly. He opened the barn doors wide and gestured for them to enter. Luna chirped and led the way inside. The others followed hesitantly, sniffing at everything and staying close together. Daniel brought out all the food he could spare and fresh water. The creatures ate hungrily, as if they had not had a decent meal in a long time. Over the following weeks, Daniel learned more about his new companions. They worked together with incredible coordination. When one spotted danger, the others knew immediately. They seemed to communicate without sounds, through body language and movements too subtle for Daniel to fully understand. They helped with the ranch work without being asked, as if they understood what needed to be done. Daniel expanded his hunting and fishing to feed 7 mouths instead of 1. The creatures, which he started calling the pack, helped him track game. They were excellent hunters, but they always brought their catches back to share. They never took more than they needed, and they seemed to understand conservation. Daniel had never seen anything like it. One evening, as Daniel sat by his fire with Luna at his feet and the others resting nearby, he decided to tell them a story. He did not know if they would understand, but talking helped him feel less alone. He told them about Earth before the Caltherians came. He talked about cities full of people, about farms and schools and families. He explained how humanity had been forced to leave their home. The pack listened with what seemed like genuine interest. Their ears were forward, and their eyes stayed focused on Daniel's face. When he finished, Luna rested her head on his knee in a gesture of comfort. Daniel stroked her fur and felt a strange sense of gratitude. He might be the last human on Earth, but he was not alone anymore. As months passed, Daniel noticed the pack learning human behaviors. They began to anticipate his needs even better than before. When he worked on fixing equipment, they would bring him tools. When he planted crops, they would help dig in ways that did not damage the seeds. They learned to be gentle with the cattle and chickens, treating them as part of their extended pack. Daniel started teaching them specific tasks. He showed them how to open gates and close them again. He taught them to recognize different alarm signals, like the bell he would ring if there was a fire or a predator nearby. They learned to understand pointing and hand signals. Their progress was remarkable and sometimes a little frightening. These were not simple animals. They were something far more advanced. One day, while working in his workshop, Daniel found an old tablet computer that still had some charge. He had avoided using technology because it might alert the Caltharians to his presence, but curiosity got the better of him. He accessed some old databases he had downloaded before the evacuation. He searched for information about alien species that looked like wolves. After hours of searching, he found a reference to the Venatari. They were described as a semi-sentient species native to a moon in a distant system. The entry said they were highly intelligent pack hunters with natural coordination abilities. It also said that some had been captured by the Caltharians for use in hunting expeditions on game preserves. Daniel looked at Luna and the others with a new understanding. They had not just wandered to Earth. They had been brought here as prisoners and somehow escaped. They were survivors just like him. The Caltharians had stolen them from their home the same way they had stolen Earth from humanity. He shut down the tablet and went outside where the pack was resting in the sun. Luna raised her head as he approached. Daniel sat down among them and they gathered around him. He told them what he had learned about the Venatari. He promised them that they would be safe here, that he would protect them the way they had protected him. The pack seemed to understand. They pressed close to Daniel in a gesture that felt like trust and acceptance. In that moment, Daniel realized something important. He had saved Luna's life that winter night, but she had saved his too. She had brought him companionship and purpose. She had brought her pack and given him a family again. As the seasons changed and his small ranch continued to operate, Daniel and the Venatari built something unique. They were different species from different worlds, but they had found common ground. They worked together, protected each other, and shared what they had. It was a small thing in the vastness of the galaxy, but it mattered. In a universe where the strong dominated the weak, they had chosen cooperation instead. Daniel did not know it yet, but word of his kindness to Luna was about to spread in ways he could never have imagined. The galaxy was full of lost and broken creatures, and some of them were heading toward Earth. His quiet life as a rancher was coming to an end, but something far more important was about to begin. Daniel Murphy stood on his porch and watched the sun set over the mountains like he had done for the past 15 years. The air was cold and clean, just the way he remembered it before everything changed. His cattle were safe in the barn and the chickens were locked up for the night. Everything was quiet except for the wind moving through the pine trees. He was 58 years old now and his hair had turned mostly gray. His hands were rough from work and his back hurt most mornings, but he was alive. He was the only human left on Earth as far as he knew. Everyone else had left when the ships came 15 years ago. The Caltharian Empire had arrived with their massive vessels and declared Earth a resource extraction zone. They said humans were too primitive to own a planet. The Galactic Council had agreed. Humanity had no choice but to leave. Millions of people boarded evacuation ships and scattered across the galaxy to whatever worlds would take them. But Daniel had refused to go. This was his land, his home, the ranch his grandfather had built. He had loaded up his truck with supplies, gathered his livestock, and driven deep into the Rocky Mountains. He found an old valley that was hard to reach and set up his new home there. The Caltharians never bothered looking for stragglers. One human was not worth their time. The first few years had been hard. Daniel had to learn how to survive without stores or hospitals or any connection to civilization. He hunted and fished and grew what he could. He fixed his equipment with salvaged parts from abandoned towns. He talked to his animals because there was no one else to talk to. Sometimes he wondered if he had made a mistake by staying, but then he would look at the mountains and remember why he could not leave. Winter was always the worst time. The snow came heavy in the mountains and the temperatures dropped far below zero. Daniel had to work twice as hard just to keep his animals alive. He chopped wood until his shoulders ached and checked his traps every day. The cold seemed to seep into his bones no matter how close he sat to the fire. It was during one of these harsh winter evenings that Daniel heard something outside. It was late and the wind was howling. He grabbed his rifle and put on his heavy coat before opening the door. The snow was falling thick and he could barely see 10 feet in front of him. He walked toward the sound and found something caught in the wreckage of an old mining drone that had crashed years ago. The metal was twisted and sharp. As he got closer, he saw it was an animal, but not like any he had seen before. It looked similar to a wolf, but much larger. Its fur was silver blue and seemed to shimmer even in the darkness. The creature was trapped by its hind leg and bleeding badly. Daniel approached slowly with his rifle ready. The animal watched him with amber eyes that seemed almost human in their intelligence. It did not growl or snap at him. Instead, it just watched and waited. Daniel could see the pain in those eyes and the fear. He made a decision that would change everything. He set down his rifle and moved closer with his tools. The creature tensed but did not attack. Daniel worked carefully to free the leg from the twisted metal. The animal whimpered but stayed still. When the leg finally came free, Daniel expected the creature to run, but it just collapsed in the snow. Daniel could not leave it there to die. He made a makeshift stretcher from branches and rope and dragged the heavy animal back to his barn. It took all his strength and he had to stop several times to rest. By the time he got the creature inside, both of them were exhausted. He set up a pen in the warmest corner of the barn and laid the animal on clean straw. The wound on its leg was deep and needed stitches. Daniel had done this kind of work on cattle before, but never on something like this. The creature watched him as he cleaned the wound and prepared his needle and thread. Those amber eyes never left his face. Daniel worked as gently as he could. The animal flinched but did not try to bite him. He stitched the wound closed and wrapped it with clean bandages. Then he brought water and some meat from his stores. The creature drank the water eagerly but only sniffed at the meat before closing its eyes. Over the next few weeks, Daniel visited the barn several times each day to check on his patient. He changed the bandages and brought food and water. He talked to the creature while he worked, the way he talked to his other animals. He told it about the ranch and the weather and how lonely it got in the mountains. The creature seemed to listen. Its ears would perk up when Daniel entered the barn and it would watch him with those intelligent eyes. Slowly it began to eat, first just a little, then more as its strength returned. The wound began to heal cleanly without infection. Daniel started calling the creature Luna because of her silver-blue fur. He was not sure if it was actually female, but the name seemed to fit. Luna began to respond to her name, turning her head when Daniel called out. She would make soft sounds when he brought food. Not quite barks, but something between a whine and a chirp. After 3 weeks, Luna could stand on her injured leg. After 4 weeks, she could walk without limping. Daniel knew she would leave soon. Wild animals did not stay once they were healed. He tried not to think about going back to being completely alone, but Luna did not leave. She stayed in the barn and followed Daniel around the ranch when he did his chores. She was gentle with the other animals and seemed to understand what Daniel needed before he asked. She would alert him to dangers and help him herd the cattle. It was like having a very smart dog, except Luna was much more than that. Daniel began to realize that Luna was not from Earth. She had to be one of the alien species that existed out in the galaxy. Somehow she had ended up here, abandoned or escaped or lost. It did not matter to Daniel. She was here now and she had chosen to stay with him. That winter turned out to be less lonely than the others. Daniel had someone to talk to again, even if Luna could not talk back. He no longer felt like the last living soul on Earth. When spring came and the snow melted, Daniel looked forward to each new day. He had no idea that Luna was about to bring more changes to his quiet life in the mountains. 3 years passed in the mountains and Daniel's life had changed in ways he never expected. The Venatari pack had grown to 20 members as Luna gave birth to pups and other escaped Venatari found their way to the valley. The ranch had expanded significantly with the help of his intelligent companions. Daniel had built new structures and planted larger fields. They had created a thriving little ecosystem hidden away from the galaxy's watchful eyes. Daniel had also begun rescuing other creatures he found in the wilderness. Some were alien animals that had been abandoned when their owners evacuated Earth. Others had escaped from Caltherian research facilities or breeding programs. Each one found a place in the growing community. Daniel treated them all with the same kindness he had shown Luna, and they repaid him with loyalty and hard work. One autumn morning, Daniel was working on reinforcing the barn when Luna suddenly tensed. Her ears went flat and she made a low warning sound. The entire pack responded immediately, forming a defensive circle around the ranch. Daniel grabbed his rifle and scanned the sky. Something was coming. A small spacecraft appeared over the eastern ridge, trailing smoke and losing altitude fast. It was not a Caltherian design, but something smaller and more compact. The ship wobbled dangerously before crash landing in the meadow about half a mile from the ranch. Daniel and the Venatari moved cautiously toward the crash site. The vessel had torn a long scar in the earth and come to rest against a pile of boulders. Smoke poured from its engines and sparks flew from damaged systems. Daniel approached carefully with Luna and 2 other Venatari flanking him. He could hear movement inside the ship and what sounded like voices calling out in pain. The ship's hatch had been damaged in the crash and was partially open. Daniel set down his rifle and used a pry bar to force it wider. Inside the dim interior, he found two small figures trapped under fallen debris. They were unlike anything he had seen before, even in the databases. They stood maybe 4 feet tall with gray skin, large dark eyes, and delicate features. One was clearly older than the other, and both were injured. Daniel carefully moved the debris and helped them out of the wreckage. The older one looked at him with surprise and fear. She spoke in a language Daniel did not understand, but her tone was defensive. The younger one, who appeared to be male, was unconscious and bleeding from a head wound. Daniel made calming gestures and pointed toward his ranch in the distance. The female hesitated but looked at her injured companion and nodded. Daniel fashioned another stretcher and carried the unconscious male while Luna helped guide the female, who limped badly on a twisted ankle. Back at the ranch, Daniel set them up in a spare room he had built onto his house. He cleaned their wounds with the same care he had shown Luna years before. The female watched him suspiciously but allowed him to work. When he finished, he brought water and food. The female took the water but refused the food, probably unsure if it was safe for her species. Daniel left them to rest and went back to examine the crashed ship. It was beyond repair and its systems were completely fried. He salvaged what he could and covered the wreckage with branches to hide it from aerial surveillance. Whatever these beings were running from, he did not want to make them easy to find. That evening, the female alien approached Daniel as he sat on his porch. She moved carefully, still favoring her injured ankle. Luna watched but did not interfere. The female looked at Daniel for a long moment and then spoke. To his amazement, she was speaking English now, though with a strange accent. Her name was Kira, and the injured male was her brother Nevin. They were Zenthari, a species known for their natural technical abilities. Their home colony had been enslaved by the Caltharian Empire decades ago. Kira and Nevin had been working in the Empire's shipyards until they managed to steal a small vessel and escape. Their ship had malfunctioned while passing near Earth, and they had crashed. Kira stared at Daniel with wonder in her large eyes. She had not expected to find a human on Earth. The Zenthari had heard stories about humanity's forced evacuation. She asked Daniel why he had stayed behind. He explained simply that this was his home and he would not abandon it. Over the following days, Nevin recovered from his injuries. He was younger than Kira by several years and more curious about everything. He was fascinated by the Venatari and spent hours watching them work. He examined Daniel's equipment with professional interest and pointed out ways to improve efficiency. Kira proved to be incredibly skilled with technology. She looked at Daniel's salvaged equipment and makeshift repairs with a mix of respect and horror. She asked if she could help improve things, and Daniel agreed. Within weeks, she had repaired and upgraded systems that Daniel had been struggling with for years. She built better water pumps, improved the solar panels, and created a more efficient power storage system. Nevin focused on defenses. He pointed out that Daniel's ranch was vulnerable from the air and from several ground approaches. With Daniel's permission, he began designing early warning systems using salvaged parts from their crashed ship. Luna and the Venatari helped him set up sensors around the valley perimeter. The siblings integrated into the community surprisingly well. Kira taught Daniel about galactic politics and technology. She explained how the Caltharian Empire operated and why Earth had been taken. The Galactic Council was supposed to protect less advanced species, but they were corrupt and lazy. The Caltharians had money and influence, so the Council looked the other way when they claimed primitive worlds. Daniel told Kira about his years alone and how Luna had changed everything. He showed her the growing community of rescued creatures and explained his philosophy. Everyone who came here had a place. Everyone contributed what they could. Everyone was protected. It was simple, but it worked. Kira was amazed by what Daniel had built. In her experience, different species rarely cooperated so well. There were always conflicts over resources or cultural differences. But here in this hidden valley, a human and a pack of Venatari and now 2 Zenthari were living and working together peacefully. It seemed almost impossible. One night, as they all sat around a fire, Kira asked Daniel if he ever regretted staying on Earth. He thought about it for a while before answering. He said he had been lonely at first, but Luna and the others had given him purpose. He was doing something meaningful here. He was providing a home for those who had nowhere else to go. That mattered more than comfort or safety. Nevin asked what Daniel planned to do if the Caltherians discovered them. Daniel admitted he did not have a good answer. His ranch was hidden and the Caltherians rarely bothered with Earth anymore, but discovery was always possible. If it happened, he would do what he could to protect everyone here. He would not run and he would not surrender. Kira and Nevin looked at each other and seemed to make a decision. Kira told Daniel that if he would have them, they would stay and help build whatever he was creating here. They had no other home and no other family. But more than that, they believed in what he was doing. They wanted to be part of it. Daniel accepted their offer and felt grateful for their skills and company. The community grew stronger with the Zenthari contributions. Kira's technology and Nevin's defensive strategies made the ranch more secure and efficient. The Venatari accepted the siblings as part of the pack. Everyone worked together toward common goals. Winter came again and the community prepared together. They had enough food stored and enough shelter for everyone. Daniel looked around at the strange family he had gathered and felt something he had not felt in years. He felt hope. Against all odds, they had built something good here, something worth protecting. What Daniel did not know was that their story was already beginning to spread. In the underground networks that connected refugees and escaped slaves across the galaxy, whispers traveled about a safe place on Earth. A place where a human lived with other species in peace. A place where the forgotten and unwanted could find home. More refugees were coming, and with them would come greater challenges and dangers. The discovery came on a morning that started like any other. Daniel was working with Torin in the fields while Luna supervised the Venatari pups playing nearby. The community had grown comfortable in their routines, and that comfort made them less cautious than they should have been. Vex was in the command center monitoring the perimeter, sensors when he detected something that made his blood run cold. A Caltherian survey ship had entered Earth's atmosphere and was moving in a search pattern. It was still hundreds of miles away, but it was heading in their general direction. He immediately sounded the alarm. Daniel ran to the command center with Luna at his heels. Kira was already there, pulling up tactical displays. The survey ship was scanning for energy signatures and unusual activity. Nevin worked frantically to mask their power output, but they had grown too large. Their farming equipment, their workshops, their living quarters all generated signatures that were hard to hide. The survey ship adjusted course and began moving directly toward the valley. They had been detected. Vex estimated they had maybe 2 hours before the ship arrived. Daniel called an emergency council meeting while the community began preparing for the worst. The council gathered quickly, and Daniel explained the situation. They had always known this day might come, but facing it was different than planning for it. Some members suggested evacuation, but there was nowhere to go. They had no ships and the Caltherian vessel would track them wherever they fled. Others wanted to hide in the mountains, but with 200 people that was impossible. Vex spoke up and said they should prepare to defend themselves. The survey ship would have a small crew and limited firepower. If they could disable it, they might buy time to figure out their next move. It was risky, but it was better than surrender. Daniel looked around at the council members and saw fear but also determination. They had built something worth protecting. Daniel made his decision. They would not hide and they would not run. They would meet the Caltherians and try to negotiate first. If negotiation failed, they would defend their home. He asked Vex to position the defense force but told him not to fire unless Daniel gave the order. He wanted to avoid violence if possible. The survey ship entered the valley an hour later and hovered over the community. It was a sleek vessel about twice the size of a large house, bristling with sensors and weapons. A voice boomed from external speakers demanding that whoever was below identify themselves and explain their presence on Imperial territory. Daniel walked into the open field at the center of the community with Luna and several Venatari flanking him. Kira and Nevin stood behind him along with Torin and representatives from other species. Vex and the defense force were positioned out of sight but ready to act. A landing ramp extended from the survey ship, and 3 Caltherians descended. They were tall and imposing with dark blue skin and 4 arms. Their eyes were cold and calculating. The leader wore the insignia of a commander and carried himself with authority. His name was Zrath, and he looked at Daniel with obvious surprise. Zrath spoke in perfect English and demanded to know why a human was on Earth. The planet had been legally transferred to the Caltherian Empire and all humans had been evacuated 15 years ago. Daniel responded calmly that he had never left because this was his home. He had as much right to be here as anyone. Zrath looked past Daniel at the community beyond. He saw members of multiple species going about their routines. He saw buildings and farms and all the signs of an established settlement. His expression shifted from surprise to anger. This was illegal on multiple levels. Earth was an extraction zone and unauthorized settlements were forbidden. More importantly, several of the species he saw were supposed to be contained in other facilities. The commander's gaze fell on the Venatari, and his anger intensified. The Venatari were Caltherian property, escaped from a hunting preserve years ago. They should have been recaptured or destroyed. Instead, they were here living freely alongside other species. This was unacceptable. Zrath issued an ultimatum. Everyone in the settlement would surrender immediately. The humans would be relocated, the Venatari would be returned to Caltherian facilities, and the other species would be processed according to imperial law. Resistance would be met with lethal force. He gave them 1 hour to comply. Daniel listened to the ultimatum and felt anger rising in his chest. These beings had stolen Earth from humanity. They had enslaved and abused countless species across the galaxy. They had turned the Venatari into hunting animals and treated other intelligent species as property. Now they expected Daniel to hand over everyone who had trusted him. He looked at Luna and the other Venatari. He thought about Kira and Nevan who had found refuge here. He remembered Torin and his family who had lost everything to war. He considered all the refugees who had come seeking peace and safety. He had made them a promise and he would not break it. Daniel spoke clearly so everyone could hear. He told Zrath that this settlement was built on principles of cooperation and mutual respect. Everyone here had come voluntarily and everyone was free to leave if they chose. But no one would be forced out and no one would be handed over to the Empire. This was their home and they had a right to defend it. Zrath laughed at Daniel's defiance. He said one old human and a few hundred refugees could not stand against the Caltherian Empire. He could call for reinforcements that would crush the settlement within days. Resistance was futile and would only lead to unnecessary deaths. That was when Kira stepped forward. She had been waiting for this moment and had prepared carefully. She activated a device she had been hiding and suddenly a shimmering barrier sprang up around the entire valley. It was a shield generator powered by Earth's magnetic field, a technology that even the Caltherians had not perfected. Zrath stared at the shield in disbelief. Such technology should not exist, and certainly not in the hands of refugees. He demanded to know where they had obtained it. Kira smiled and explained that she had built it herself using principles the Zenthari had developed in secret. The Empire had underestimated what their slaves were capable of. The shield would hold against orbital bombardment and most conventional weapons. It required enormous power, but Earth's magnetic field provided an essentially unlimited supply. The settlement could maintain the shield indefinitely as long as the generator remained intact. Zrath's survey ship was now trapped inside the shield along with his crew. Daniel offered Zrath a choice. The commander and his crew could leave peacefully and report back to the Empire. In exchange, Daniel would share the shield technology freely with any species that wanted it. Oppressed worlds could use it to defend themselves against the Caltherians and other aggressors. Or Zrath could try to fight and risk losing his ship and crew. Zrath refused immediately. He would not negotiate with primitives and refugees. He ordered his crew to open fire on the settlement buildings. Energy weapons blazed but struck the shield and dissipated harmlessly. The defense force responded and disabled the survey ship's weapon systems with precise shots to external hardpoints. Vex had taught them well. The commander realized he was in serious trouble. His ship was damaged and trapped. His weapons were useless against the shield. He was outnumbered and outmaneuvered. He ordered his crew to retreat back to the ship and sent an emergency transmission to the nearest Caltherian fleet. Daniel let them go. He knew the transmission meant reinforcements would come, but he needed time to prepare. More importantly, he needed to get his message out to the galaxy. Kira had been recording everything that happened. She prepared to broadcast the entire encounter through underground networks and pirate communication channels. The broadcast went out that evening and spread across the galaxy faster than anyone expected. It showed a human standing up to a Caltherian commander. It showed multiple species living together in peace. It demonstrated shield technology that could protect worlds from imperial aggression. Most importantly, it showed that the Caltherians could be defied. Reactions poured in from across the galaxy. Some species celebrated and called Daniel a hero. Others warned that the Caltherians would destroy the settlement and everyone in it. Refugee networks buzzed with discussions about the shield technology and whether it could really work. The Galactic Council received thousands of petitions demanding they intervene. Daniel watched the responses come in and felt both hope and dread. They had struck a blow against the Empire, but they had also painted a target on themselves. Zarath would return with enough force to overwhelm them. The shield would buy time, but not forever. They needed allies, and they needed them fast. That night, Daniel sat with his council and planned their next moves. Kira and Nevin would work on strengthening the shield and preparing backup systems. Vex would train more volunteers and improve their defenses. Torin would ensure they had enough supplies for a long siege. The Praxians would continue broadcasting their message and seeking support from other species. Luna lay at Daniel's feet as he reviewed maps and supply lists. She was old now and tired, but she remained alert and protective. Daniel reached down to stroke her fur and felt grateful for her presence. She had been with him from the beginning, and she would be with him to the end, whatever that end might be. The broadcasts from Murphy Valley changed the galaxy in ways no one had predicted. Daniel's message about cooperation and resistance spread like fire through dry grass. Within weeks, rebellions erupted on a dozen worlds. Enslaved species rose up against their masters. Oppressed colonies demanded independence. The Caltherian Empire found itself fighting on multiple fronts as its authority crumbled. The shield technology that Kira shared freely proved to be exactly what she had promised. Worlds that installed the generators became nearly impossible to conquer through conventional military force. The Caltherians tried to suppress the technology, but it spread too quickly through underground networks. Within months, over 50 worlds had operational shields protecting them. The desertion rate in the Caltherian military reached crisis levels. Soldiers who had witnessed the broadcasts questioned their orders and their purpose. Many of them were from species that the Empire had conquered generations ago. They had been raised to believe Caltherian rule was inevitable and just. Murphy Valley proved that belief was a lie. Vex received messages from dozens of Caltherian soldiers asking about the settlement. They wanted to know if the broadcasts were real, if different species truly lived together peacefully. Some asked if they could come to Murphy Valley and join the community. Vex shared these messages with Daniel and the council. Daniel agreed to accept any Caltherian who genuinely wanted to change. The community had been built on the principle that anyone could find redemption. Several deserters arrived over the following months and proved themselves through hard work and honest effort. Their presence sent a powerful message that even members of the Empire could reject its values. The Galactic Council struggled to maintain order as the political landscape shifted beneath them. Minor species that had been ignored for centuries suddenly had leverage. They formed coalitions and made demands. They threatened to withdraw from council agreements if reforms were not implemented. The council faced a choice between meaningful change or total collapse. A special session was called to address the Murphy Valley situation and the larger issues it represented. Every species in the council sent representatives to the neutral station where they met. The session was broadcast across the galaxy with billions watching. Daniel was invited to attend and present testimony. He debated whether to go. Leaving Murphy Valley meant leaving Luna and the others. It meant trusting that the council would act in good faith. But Kira convinced him that his presence could make a difference. The galaxy needed to hear directly from the human who had built a multi-species community from nothing. Daniel agreed to attend with the condition that Luna and several others could come with him. The council reluctantly accepted after realizing that denying the request would look bad to their watching constituents. A small ship arrived to transport Daniel and his delegation. The journey to the council station took 3 days. Daniel had never been in space before and found the experience both amazing and unsettling. He stayed close to Luna, who seemed more comfortable with space travel than he was. Kira explained the various species and factions they would encounter at the council. The station was enormous, a massive structure that housed representatives from hundreds of worlds. Daniel and his delegation were escorted to guest quarters and given time to prepare. The Venatari attracted attention wherever they went. Most species had heard about them, but few had seen them in person. Their obvious intelligence surprised many observers who had assumed they were just clever animals. The council session began the next morning in a vast chamber that could hold thousands. Daniel stood at the center with Luna beside him and his delegation arranged behind him. Around them in ascending tiers sat representatives from species across the galaxy. Some looked curious, some hostile, some supportive. The council speaker called the session to order and invited Daniel to present his testimony. He approached the speaking platform feeling more nervous than he had facing Zrath's weapons. These politicians could do more damage with words and laws than any army could with guns. Daniel spoke simply and directly the way he always had. He told them about his ranch and how he had refused to leave Earth. He described finding Luna and helping her, not because he expected anything in return, but because it was the right thing to do. He explained how the community grew as more refugees arrived seeking safety. He talked about the different species working together and learning from each other. He described how the Zenthari improved their technology, how the Torvan enhanced their farming, how the Praxians preserved knowledge. He explained that everyone contributed according to their abilities and everyone received according to their needs. Then Daniel addressed the harder questions. He presented evidence of Caltharian crimes collected by the Praxians and verified by former soldiers like Vex. He showed records of enslaved species and conquered worlds. He discussed the corruption that allowed the Empire to operate with impunity for so long. The Caltharian representatives tried to object, but Daniel continued speaking. He noted that the Council had the authority to stop these abuses but chose not to act. They had turned blind eyes to injustice because dealing with the Empire was profitable and convenient. They were complicit in the suffering of billions. Some Council members shifted uncomfortably at this accusation. Others nodded in agreement. The chamber erupted in debate as species took sides. Daniel waited for order to be restored before continuing. He concluded by presenting his specific demands. Earth should be returned to humanity completely, not just designated a protectorate. The Venatari and other species in Murphy Valley should be recognized as fully sentient, with all associated rights. The Council should enforce its own laws against slavery and conquest. Species that violated these laws should face real consequences. Finally, Daniel offered his help. Murphy Valley would serve as an example and a resource for other communities trying to build multi-species cooperation. They would share technology and knowledge freely. They would accept refugees who had nowhere else to go. But they would not submit to Council authority unless the Council proved itself worthy of that authority. The chamber fell silent when Daniel finished. He had challenged the most powerful institution in the galaxy, and done so while the entire galaxy watched. The Council speaker thanked him for his testimony and called for deliberation. The debates lasted for 3 days. Daniel and his delegation waited in their quarters while politicians argued about precedent and jurisdiction, and political consequences. Kira used the time to meet with representatives from various species, building alliances and sharing information. Vex connected with other military personnel who were questioning their loyalties. Luna stayed close to Daniel throughout the waiting period. She seemed to sense his anxiety about the outcome. He spent hours stroking her fur and talking quietly about what would happen if the Council ruled against them. They might have won the battle in Murphy Valley, but they could still lose the political war. On the 4th day, the Council reached its decision. Daniel and his delegation were summoned back to the chamber. The speaker read the resolution with formal language that took several minutes to decode. But the essential points were clear. Earth was restored to humanity as a sovereign world. Murphy Valley was recognized as an independent territory with the right to self-governance. The Venatari were granted full sentient status. An investigation would begin into Caltharian activities on conquered worlds. The Council would enforce existing laws against slavery and conquest. It was not everything Daniel had hoped for, but it was far more than he had expected. The chamber erupted in noise as some species celebrated and others protested. Daniel looked at Luna and saw her tail wagging slightly. She understood that they had won, but the resolution came with conditions. Murphy Valley would be monitored to ensure they were not harboring criminals or engaging in illegal activities. They would need to submit regular reports about their population and resources. They would be expected to cooperate with Council investigations when requested. Daniel accepted these conditions. They were reasonable and gave the Council a way to save face while implementing reforms. More importantly, the decision sent a message to the entire galaxy. The old system of domination and exploitation was ending. A new era of cooperation and justice was beginning. The return journey to Earth felt different than the trip out. Daniel and his delegation were no longer anonymous refugees. They were representatives of a movement that was reshaping galactic politics. Messages poured in from worlds across space expressing support and asking for guidance. When they arrived back at Murphy Valley, the entire community gathered to welcome them home. Daniel addressed the crowd and explained what the council had decided. There was celebration, but also understanding that the real work was just beginning. They had won recognition, but they still needed to prove that their model of cooperation could work long-term. That evening, Daniel sat on his porch with Luna beside him and looked out over the valley. Lights glowed from homes where a dozen species lived together. Children of different worlds played in the streets. Adults worked together on projects that benefited everyone. They had changed the galaxy, but the galaxy was also changing them. Murphy Valley was no longer just a hidden refuge. The whispers in the underground networks grew louder over the following months. Refugees passing through various space stations heard stories about Earth and the human who offered sanctuary. Most dismissed it as legend or rumor. Earth was an extraction zone controlled by the Caltherians. No one could survive there, especially not a multi-species community, but desperate people clung to even unlikely hopes. The first new arrivals came on a cold spring morning. Daniel was repairing fence posts when Luna alerted him to movement on the eastern trail. 3 figures emerged from the forest, moving slowly and carefully. They were tall and thin, with rough brown skin that looked almost like bark. Their hands had only 3 fingers each, and their eyes were large and golden. Daniel approached with Luna at his side while Kira and Nevin came out of the workshop to see what was happening. The 3 strangers stopped, and the tallest one spoke in halting English. His name was Torin, and he was from a species called the Torvin. They were farmers whose world had been caught in the crossfire of a territorial war. Their crops had been burned and their families scattered. They had heard rumors of a safe place on Earth and spent months traveling to find it. Daniel looked at the 3 tired refugees and made the same decision he always made. He welcomed them. Torin and his family were given a place to stay and food to eat. In return, they offered their farming knowledge. The Torvin had been cultivating crops for thousands of years on their homeworld. They knew techniques that Daniel had never heard of. Within weeks, the ranch's agricultural output improved dramatically. Torin showed Daniel how to rotate crops more efficiently and how to enrich the soil using natural methods. His wife Mira knew which plants grew well together and which ones should be kept apart. Their son Kellen learned quickly from both his parents and from Daniel's ranching methods. The Venatari helped with the heavy labor, and soon the fields expanded into areas that had been unused before. More refugees arrived throughout that year. A small group of Praxians came next, scholars from a species that resembled tall gray birds. They had fled religious persecution on their colony world. They brought knowledge and books and a hunger to preserve information. Daniel helped them set up a library in an old storage building. The Praxians began documenting everything about the community, creating records of who lived there and what they had accomplished. Then came a family of traders from 3 different species who had been traveling together when pirates attacked their ship. They crashed on Earth while trying to escape. One of them knew mechanics, another understood trade and logistics, and the third was a medic with knowledge of multiple species biology. Each found a role in the growing community. The refugees kept coming in small groups. Some stayed only briefly before moving on to other destinations. Others decided to make the valley their permanent home. Each brought skills and knowledge that strengthened the community. More importantly, they brought hope and purpose. They proved that cooperation between species was possible. Daniel found himself mediating disputes and organizing resources more than he worked on the ranch. 2 species might disagree about how to build something or where to plant crops. Cultural differences caused misunderstandings. Resource allocation required careful balancing. Daniel handled each issue with the same practical wisdom he had used in ranching. Listen to both sides, find common ground, make fair decisions, and always remember that everyone was working toward the same goals. The community began calling him Chief Murphy, though he insisted he was just a rancher. The title made him uncomfortable, but he understood why they used it. They needed someone to coordinate efforts and settle disputes. His fairness and his relationship with the Venatari made him the natural choice. Luna's acceptance of him carried weight with all the other species. If the Venatari trusted him, others felt they could too. Kira suggested forming a council with representatives from each species. Daniel agreed, and they held their first meeting in the main hall of what had become the community center. Each species sent someone to speak for their interests. Daniel listened to all of them and helped them reach agreements on important issues. He made it clear that he did not want to rule over anyone. He wanted them to govern themselves. He would only step in when they could not reach consensus. The council worked well for routine matters, but everyone still deferred to Daniel for final decisions. He tried to encourage them to be more independent, but they insisted. They trusted his judgment and his commitment to fairness. Slowly, Daniel accepted his role as leader, even though he never sought it. Security became a more pressing concern as the community grew. Nevin had been working on defensive systems, but they needed people to operate them. A Caltherian deserter named Vex arrived one day and changed everything. He was a soldier who had grown disgusted with the Empire's cruelty. He had witnessed atrocities and could no longer participate. When he heard about the community on Earth, he stole a small ship and came to offer his services. The community was suspicious of Vex at first. He was Caltherian, the same species that had taken Earth and enslaved so many others. But Daniel saw something in Vex that others missed. He saw genuine remorse and a desire to make things right. Daniel gave him a chance, and Vex proved his worth quickly. Vex knew Caltherian military tactics inside and out. He understood their technology and their strategies. He began training volunteers in defensive techniques and helped Nevin upgrade the security systems. The Venatari worked closely with Vex, their natural coordination combining with his military knowledge to create an effective defense force. The valley settlement expanded rapidly. New buildings went up to house the growing population. The Zenthari designed efficient structures that the Torvin and others helped build. The Praxians established a school to teach young members of all species. The medic set up a clinic. Traders organized a supply system. What had been a simple ranch was becoming a small town. Daniel walked through the community one evening and marveled at what they had created. Children of different species played together in the streets. Adults from various worlds worked side by side in the fields and workshops. The Venatari moved among them all, accepted as equals and friends. It seemed impossible, and yet it was real. Luna walked beside Daniel as he made his rounds. She was older now and moved a bit slower, but she was still sharp and aware. She had been there from the beginning and had seen every change. Daniel rested his hand on her head and thanked her quietly. None of this would have existed without her. She had trusted him and brought others who needed help. She had been the first bridge between species. The community numbered over 200 individuals from a dozen different species. They had established farms, workshops, schools, a clinic, a library, and homes. They governed themselves through the council with Daniel as their chief. They protected each other and shared resources. They had proven that different species could live together in peace, but growth brought new challenges. More people meant more supplies needed. More supplies meant more risk of detection. The Caltherians rarely visited Earth, but they did send automated survey ships occasionally. Kira and Nevin worked constantly to hide their energy signatures and mask their activities. Vex trained the defense force for a conflict he hoped would never come. Daniel knew they could not stay hidden forever. The community was too large and too active. Eventually, someone would notice. He held a council meeting to discuss their options. They could try to stay hidden and hope for the best. They could split up and scatter before they were discovered. Or they could prepare to defend what they had built. The council debated for hours. Some argued for caution and remaining hidden. Others insisted they should not abandon what they had created. The Praxians pointed out that word of their community was spreading across the galaxy. Refugees were coming because they had nowhere else to go. Abandoning them was not an option. In the end, they voted to stay and prepare for whatever came. They would continue to hide as best they could, but they would also strengthen their defenses. If the Caltherians discovered them, they would be ready. Daniel supported the decision even though it meant greater danger. These people had come here seeking refuge, and he would not turn them away. As the meeting ended and everyone returned to their homes, Daniel stood alone on a hill overlooking the valley. Lights twinkled from dozens of buildings below. Smoke rose from chimneys. He could hear distant voices and laughter. This community represented something the galaxy had forgotten. It showed that cooperation worked better than domination, that different species could build together rather than conquer each other. Daniel knew that message threatened the Caltherian Empire and the corrupt Galactic Council. They profited from division and conflict. A successful multi-species community undermined their power. Discovery was not just likely but inevitable. When it came, they would face forces far stronger than anything Daniel had ever dealt with. But they would face it together, and that gave him hope. Commander Zrath returned exactly 1 week after his initial defeat. This time he brought 3 warships and 500 soldiers. The Caltherian fleet entered Earth's atmosphere with overwhelming force, confident that no ragtag group of refugees could stand against them. Zrath had been humiliated by his first encounter and was determined to crush the settlement completely. The warships took up positions around the valley while ground forces deployed at multiple entry points. Zrath sent another message demanding immediate surrender. He promised that resistance would be met with total destruction. Daniel watched from the command center as Caltherian forces surrounded them on all sides. The odds were impossible, but he had expected nothing less. Daniel sent his reply through the same channels that had broadcast their first encounter. He told Zrath that the people of Murphy Valley would not surrender their home or their freedom. They would defend what they had built together. The message was meant not just for Zrath, but for the entire galaxy that was watching. Daniel wanted everyone to see what ordinary beings could accomplish when they stood together. The battle began at dawn. Caltherian forces attacked from 3 directions simultaneously, expecting to overwhelm the defenders quickly. Instead, they walked into carefully prepared defenses. The Venatari used their intimate knowledge of the terrain to strike from unexpected angles. They moved through the forest like ghosts, hitting enemy units and vanishing before the Caltherians could respond. Vex had trained the defense force in guerrilla tactics that he had seen used against the Empire on other worlds. Small teams would engage briefly, then retreat, drawing the enemy into ambush zones. The Zenthari had built traps throughout the valley, hidden devices that disabled vehicles and disrupted communications. The Torvan had created concealed tunnels that allowed defenders to move unseen. Zrath's ground forces became frustrated as their technological advantages proved useless. Their heavy armor was trapped by collapsed tunnels. Their communications were jammed by Zenthari hacking. Their numerical superiority meant nothing in the dense forest where the Venatari hunted them relentlessly. Casualties mounted and progress stalled. Daniel coordinated the defense from his command center with maps spread across every surface. He had learned the land over 18 years of living here. He knew every ridge and stream and cave system. His rancher's understanding of terrain management translated into brilliant defensive strategy. He positioned forces where they could do the most damage and withdrew them before they could be cornered. The Caltherian warships attempted orbital strikes on key positions, but the shield held firm. Energy weapons splashed harmlessly against the barrier. Kinetic projectiles were deflected. Zrath realized that without disabling the shield generator, his warships were useless. He ordered ground forces to locate and destroy the generator. But the generator's location was a closely guarded secret. Kira had built it deep underground with multiple redundant systems. Even if the Caltherians found the main facility, backup generators would activate immediately. The shield was designed to survive prolonged assault. Days passed and the siege turned into a grinding stalemate. Caltherian forces controlled the valley perimeter, but could not advance into the settlement itself. Every attempt to push forward met fierce resistance. The defenders lost people too, but far fewer than expected. Their tactics and knowledge of the terrain gave them advantages that technology could not overcome. Zrath grew desperate as reports came in of mounting casualties. His superiors were demanding results and the entire galaxy was watching his failure. Worse, the broadcast from Murphy Valley showed Caltherian soldiers retreating and Caltherian weapons failing. The Empire's image of invincibility was being shattered by a group of refugees and one human rancher. On the 15th day of the siege, Daniel made a bold decision. He and a team of Venatari would infiltrate Zrath's flagship and confront the commander directly. Vex tried to argue against the plan, but Daniel insisted. They needed to break the stalemate, and the only way to do that was to make Zrath see reason. Luna insisted on coming despite her age. Daniel tried to refuse, but she would not be left behind. She had been with him from the beginning and would be with him now. Several younger Venatari joined them along with Kira, who understood Caltherian ship systems better than anyone. They moved at night through the forest, avoiding Caltherian patrols with the Venatari's natural stealth. Luna led them to a position below the flagship where it hovered at low altitude. Kira used a device to temporarily disrupt the ship's shields in a small area. They attached climbing cables and ascended quickly before the shields could reactivate. Getting inside the ship was easier than expected. Vex had taught them weak points in Caltharian security systems. Kira bypassed door locks and disabled cameras. The Venatari moved silently through corridors, their padding footsteps making no sound. They encountered a few crew members but subdued them quietly without raising alarms. The command center was deep in the ship's core. Daniel and his team positioned themselves outside and waited for the right moment. When the door opened and a crew member stepped out, they rushed inside. The Caltharians in the command center reached for weapons but froze when they saw Luna and the other Venatari baring their teeth. Zarath sat in the commander's chair and stared at Daniel with a mixture of rage and disbelief. No one had ever breached one of his ships before. The fact that a human and a group of animals had accomplished it was deeply humiliating. He demanded to know what Daniel wanted. Daniel told Zarath to order his forces to withdraw. This siege was accomplishing nothing except getting soldiers killed. The settlement would not surrender and the shield would not fall. The Empire was wasting resources on a battle they could not win. More importantly, the galaxy was watching and seeing the Empire fail. Zarath refused and called Daniel a fool. The Empire had unlimited resources and unlimited patience. They could keep up the siege for years if necessary. Eventually, the settlement would run out of supplies or make a mistake. Victory was inevitable. That was when Kira stepped forward and revealed what she had really been doing. While Daniel talked to Zarath, she had been connecting her device to the ship's communication systems. She had taken control of the flagship's broadcast equipment. Everything happening in this command center was being transmitted across the galaxy in real time. Daniel turned to face the cameras that Kira indicated. He spoke not to Zarath but to everyone watching across countless worlds. He talked about Murphy Valley and what they had built there. He described how different species worked together in peace. He explained that they wanted nothing except to live free and help others who needed refuge. He talked about the Caltharian Empire and its crimes. He mentioned species enslaved and worlds stolen. He spoke about the Venatari who had been turned into hunting animals despite their intelligence. He discussed the corruption of the Galactic Council that allowed such abuses to continue. Then Daniel made his offer. He would share the shield technology with any world that wanted it. Oppressed species could defend themselves. The Empire could no longer dominate through military force alone. The balance of power in the galaxy was about to change. Zarath realized what was happening and ordered his crew to cut the transmission. But Kira had locked them out of their own systems. The broadcast continued as Daniel concluded his speech. He told the watching galaxy that Murphy Valley would stand as an example of what cooperation could achieve. He invited other species to join them or to build their own communities based on the same principles. The transmission ended, and Kira released control of the ship's systems. Zarath could have ordered his crew to attack, but doing so would mean killing Daniel and his team on camera, which would only strengthen their message. The commander sat in his chair and realized he had lost regardless of what happened next. Daniel and his team withdrew from the ship the same way they had entered. By the time Caltharian security forces responded, they were already back in the forest heading toward the settlement. Zarath did not pursue them. He sat in his command center and tried to process what had just happened. Within hours, the broadcast had reached every corner of the galaxy. Reactions were immediate and overwhelming. Oppressed species began planning rebellions. Caltharian desertion rates spiked as soldiers questioned their orders. Minor species formed coalitions and demanded action from the Galactic Council. 3 days later, the Council sent mediators to Earth. They could no longer ignore what was happening in Murphy Valley. The siege had become a galactic crisis and they needed to resolve it before the entire political structure collapsed. Zarath received orders to cease hostilities pending negotiations. Daniel met with the mediators in the valley's community center. Representatives from 6 species sat across from him, while the galaxy watched via broadcast. They asked questions about the settlement and examined evidence of Caltharian crimes. They interviewed members of different species living in Murphy Valley. The negotiations lasted a week. Daniel presented his case clearly and calmly. He wanted Earth returned to humanity, and Murphy Valley recognized as an independent territory. He wanted the Venatari recognized as a sentient species with full rights. He wanted the Galactic Council to enforce its own laws against slavery and conquest. 5 years passed after the Council's historic decision, and Murphy Valley transformed in ways that even Daniel had not imagined. The settlement that began with one rancher and one wounded Venatari had grown into a thriving nation of over 3,000 inhabitants, representing 40 different species. The valley had expanded into the surrounding mountains with new settlements built according to the same principles that guided the original community. Humanity began returning to Earth in larger numbers. Once word spread that the planet was safe again, but they found a world that had changed dramatically in their absence. Nature had reclaimed much of what civilization had built. The Caltherians had stripped some areas for resources but left others untouched. Earth was simultaneously familiar and alien to the returning refugees. Many humans chose to settle in Murphy Valley rather than rebuilding the old cities. They were drawn by stories of the multi-species community and the legendary chief who had defied an empire. Daniel found himself welcoming families who wanted to be part of something new, rather than trying to recreate what had been lost. The valley had become more than just a settlement. It was a symbol and a pilgrimage site for beings across the galaxy who believed in cooperation over conquest. Students came to study their model of multi-species governance. Scholars arrived to document their methods and history. Artists sought inspiration from the unique culture that had emerged. Kira had established a technology institute where Zenthari engineers worked alongside humans and other species to develop innovations by combining different knowledge bases. The shield generator that had saved them during the siege was just the beginning. New discoveries emerged regularly from the collaborative work, advances that benefited the entire galaxy. The institute attracted the brightest minds from dozens of worlds. They came to work in an environment where knowledge was shared freely, and competition was replaced with cooperation. The patents and discoveries that emerged were released publicly, rather than hoarded for profit. This open approach frustrated some species but inspired many others. Niven commanded a peacekeeping force that trained members from various worlds in ethical defense tactics. The force was not an army but rather a security organization that protected Murphy Valley and provided aid to other communities that faced threats. They responded to requests for help from worlds trying to build their own multi-species settlements. The peacekeepers included former Caltherian soldiers like Vex, who had found redemption through service. They trained refugees who wanted to protect their new homes. They taught defensive strategies that emphasized minimizing casualties even among attackers. Their reputation for fairness and restraint made them respected across the galaxy. Torin and his Torvin family had expanded the agricultural operations until Murphy Valley produced far more food than they needed. The surplus was distributed to refugee communities and worlds recovering from war or disaster. The Torvin taught their techniques freely to anyone who wanted to learn. Several agricultural schools had been established to train farmers from different species. The Praxians ran extensive educational programs that taught children of different species together. The schools emphasized not just academic knowledge but also cultural understanding and cooperation. Students learned multiple languages and studied the histories of various species. They were being raised to see diversity as strength rather than weakness. Luna had passed away 2 years after the council decision. She died peacefully in her sleep with Daniel beside her. The entire community mourned her loss and built a monument in her honor at the center of the valley. The statue showed Luna sitting proudly with the inscription, "She brought us together," carved in 40 different languages. Her legacy lived on in the Venatari pack that now numbered over 100. They had been recognized as a sentient species and granted full citizenship in Murphy Valley. Young Venatari attended the schools and learned alongside other species' children. Adult Venatari held positions of responsibility throughout the community. They served as ambassadors to other worlds and helped negotiate peaceful resolutions to conflicts. Daniel still lived in his original ranch house, though it had been expanded several times to accommodate visitors. He tended his cattle in the mornings and mediated disputes in the afternoons. The Council of Representatives handled most daily governance, but they still deferred to Daniel on major decisions. He was Chief Murphy now in truth as well as in name. Age had caught up with him. He was 63 years old and his body showed the wear of decades of hard work. His hair was white and his hands were gnarled with arthritis. He moved slower than before and tired more easily, but his mind remained sharp and his commitment to the community never wavered. One evening, as Daniel sat on his porch watching the sunset, a young human couple approached. They were recent arrivals from a refugee ship, part of the latest wave of humans returning to Earth. They asked if they could speak with him and Daniel, invited them to sit. The couple introduced themselves as Helen and Greg. They had heard stories about Murphy Valley and Chief Murphy for years while living on a distant colony world. They had dreamed of coming here and being part of something meaningful. Now that they had arrived, they felt overwhelmed by everything they saw. They asked Daniel how he had built something so remarkable from nothing. Daniel considered the question while watching the valley below. Lights twinkled from hundreds of buildings. Venatari cubs played with Zenthari children in the fields. Adults from a dozen species worked together on various projects. The community buzzed with life and purpose. It seemed impossible that all of this had started with one wounded creature and one lonely rancher. He told the couple that he never set out to change the galaxy. He had simply rescued Luna because leaving her to die felt wrong. Everything else had followed from that one act of compassion. When refugees started arriving, he welcomed them because that was what decent people did. When the Caltherians threatened them, he defended them because protecting the vulnerable was right. The secret was not complex, Daniel explained. Treat others with dignity regardless of their species or background. Stand up for what is right even when it costs you. Remember that building together is always stronger than conquering alone. These simple principles guided everything Murphy Valley had become. Greg asked about the challenges they had faced. Daniel did not sugarcoat the reality. There had been conflicts between species with different cultures and values. There had been resource shortages and difficult decisions. There had been threats from those who opposed what Murphy Valley represented. Building a multi-species community was hard work that required constant effort and compromise. But the rewards made it worthwhile, Daniel continued. He talked about watching former enemies become friends. He described seeing children of different species playing together without prejudice. He shared stories of species combining their knowledge to solve problems that neither could handle alone. These moments justified all the struggles. Helen asked what advice he would give to others trying to build similar communities. Daniel thought carefully before answering. He said to start small and let trust develop naturally. Focus on practical cooperation before worrying about grand visions. Be patient with misunderstandings and quick to forgive honest mistakes. Always remember that every individual deserves respect regardless of their background. Most importantly, Daniel emphasized, never lose sight of why you are building community in the first place. It was not about power or prestige or proving anything to the galaxy. It was about creating a place where beings could live free and help each other thrive. The moment you forget that purpose, you risk becoming what you oppose. The couple thanked Daniel and left to explore more of the valley. He watched them go and felt hopeful about the future. Young people like Helen and Greg would carry forward what had been started here. They would build on the foundation that Luna and Daniel and all the others had created together. As stars appeared above the valley, Daniel reflected on the strange path his life had taken. 20 years ago, he had been a simple rancher who refused to abandon his home. He never imagined he would become chief of a multi-species nation. He never expected to play a role in reshaping galactic politics. He never dreamed that one act of kindness toward a wounded animal would lead to all of this. But life rarely followed the paths we expected. Daniel had learned that the most profound changes often started with small actions. Rescuing Luna had seemed insignificant at the time, just an old rancher helping an injured creature because it was the right thing to do. Yet that decision had rippled outward in ways he could never have predicted. Murphy Valley stood as proof that another way was possible. For millennia, the galaxy had operated on principles of domination and exploitation. The strong conquered the weak. The advanced enslaved the primitive. Cooperation was seen as weakness and diversity as a problem to be eliminated. Murphy Valley challenged all of that. They demonstrated that different species could live together peacefully. They showed that cooperation produced better outcomes than competition. They proved that treating others with dignity and respect was not naive idealism, but practical wisdom. These lessons were spreading across the galaxy and changing how species interacted with each other.